Welcome to Post Fudger Talk. I couldn't find my tripod, so I decided to do a long form content. And people usually reach out to me in the DMs on TikTok and they ask me questions. Let me look at this place. And the question the lady asked today was very big, okay? She said, Assalamu alaikum, I'm reaching out because I am on the edge of faith, dealing with disbelief. I will say that I was triggered by an ex-Muslim. Can you explain to me, especially the case of slavery and what's going on with that? So I'm going to make it really simple. We're going to go through 3 steps and talk about what is the Quran exactly and why people are having problems with this. Then we're going to talk about the systems and we're going to talk about our habits because I've been there, okay? The biggest thing is about 14 years ago, I decided to analyze the Quran by myself and I was on the edge of disbelief myself, okay? Very agnostic almost. And I keep getting these questions over and over again. And I know this is a phase that we go through, especially in the postmodern era. So I wanted to explain this in depth for you guys. And without further ado, let's get started. The main problem with religion is the fact that we are very much within our little groups. We do not understand what other religions are out there. So for instance, one of the biggest things I loved was during college, we would have all of these, little fairs and people would go around and they would hand out the Quran or they would hand out the Bible. So I got a copy of the Bible and this was the first time I ever interacted with it. That taught me a lot. And then from a Buddhist sense also, I read the Tao Te Ching. Is that the one? I'm not really sure. So I've seen that text. I've seen the other text. So when I compare that with the Quran, I have some sort of basis. So one of the biggest problems that we have is that we don't realize how other religious texts came down. And there's this book that I'm reading right now. It's about like 500 pages in which it says literally the postmodernist issue is the fact that we look at history and we try to change history, but we don't take history for what it really is. This is a recipe for disaster because history will never change, but more importantly, assuming that history should be a certain way is a big issue because it will be the way that it is. The reason I'm saying this is because we need to understand how the Quran was revealed, especially when compared to other monotheistic religions, right? So a Bible is a compilation that was written and compiled post Jesus, okay? And then the first part is going to be the Old Testament, what the Jews believe in, and then you have the New Testament, which the Christians believe in, but they believe in all of it all together, right? Because this is a message that hasn't been changed. But you will realize if you try to read the Bible, how historical it is. It's just accounts of this case and that case and that case and that case, okay? So it is a compilation of history. It's like a history book. But in the case of the Quran, it's a little bit different, but it is also a history book. The reason I'm saying this is that it was revealed over the course of 23 years based off of what was currently happening at that time. So if you don't know what's happening at that time, and I think that's one of the biggest problems we have between, those people who are like hadithists and then those who are Quranists, okay? We have separated those two factors. It is the fact that it came through the Prophet ﷺ based off of the Sahaba's life that this information was coming down. So what that means is the events that happened at that time is the only reason these type of verses came down. So when we're asking questions about like why was slavery not talked about and abolished outright, it's because that wasn't the current issue at that time. The other issue that we have and why we have this conception that it should include everything in it is because of Surah Nasr, in which it says that your religion has been perfected for you, because it has everything that you need in it. So we start compiling and like going in history like 200, 400,000, I don't know how many years slavery was after that, like the African slavery in which everybody came to the US, but that was post that. So we need to look at it as a history book. And one of the biggest advice that I got when I was younger, I didn't listen to this at all, is that you need to understand the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ in order to understand the Quran. And that's why the only Quran that I read right now has commentaries under it. And more importantly, I'm going through the seerah myself, little by little, in order to understand the context. For instance, in the Meccan era, they were being persecuted left, right, and center. Do you understand? To the point that the Prophet ﷺ, somebody came and threw trash on his back. And there was one of them, one of the Sahabas, he watched this happen because he was a slave. He was of the lower caste. And if he did anything to these higher people, he will get executed. So he didn't do anything. Nobody helped the Prophet ﷺ at that time because of political reason. And if it wasn't for Fatima, who was a child at that point, radiallahu anha, nobody would have taken all of the carcass that was on his back. Why did the Sahaba not do anything? Because if it was a political movement, there were people who came to the Prophet ﷺ, asked him for questions and answers and stuff like that. And he's like, it's not the time, not right now. It went through certain phases until they got power, but they worked with the current power that was there, because that could mean death to them, but more importantly, death to the movement. Okay, if you don't have that background, it's going to be really hard to move forward. So this is just, I just wanted to clear up what the context of the Quran is, because a lot of people don't seem to understand this. We're mixing up stuff, and this is the problem of lack of education, proper education, or proofreading what we have. And what I mean by that is unlearning the things that are not working and starting again, because a lot of our education is bits and pieces, and that's what I focus on: systems. How do you connect everything? What is the missing piece? You need to spend the rest of your life figuring out what the missing piece is, and I hope this part helped you. The first phase, we talked about the Quran and the Sunnah. Now the second phase is going to be the systems. Systems are things that have happened in which laws and government and all of this stuff have put in place things that are contradicting to what Allah's law is. Okay, human beings have free will. They can do whatever they want. So I hear a lot of people nowadays who are saying like, oh, it shouldn't have been this way, it shouldn't have been that way. Why? Like, do you live on reality? Like, I don't get it. It shouldn't have been this way. It shouldn't be. No, that's not how it works. And this is a postmodernist ideology, okay? The history is the way that it is. You have to deal with reality instead of trying to conform it to your ideology. But again, this is a very heavy topic. Literally, I'm reading 500 pages on this. It is making my head hurt, because academics, when they write, it's like, what are you saying? Get to the point. Another thing is the level of historical differences. For instance, one of the things that has been washed from us is, how did Muslim societies after the Prophet ﷺ live and thrive? Have you looked into the Abbasid era and how they used to live, in the sense of, in West Africa, Islam came to West Africa very differently. Islam came to East Africa the same way it came to the Arabs, okay? At the same time, you have to look at history again. At the same time that they were being persecuted, they were in East Africa. So when there was this one person who was like, oh, you're Muslim? And he just looked at me. I'm like, are you serious? You're from Asia. I'm from Ethiopia. Calm down. But it was there for as long as Islam was there, in the sense that they lived there because they were being persecuted. What I mean by that is even the definition of colorism and all of that stuff that has happened right now, in which we use those lenses in order to look at history, did not exist. And the Arabs over there were black. Okay, they're black in the sense of like they were dark skinned, and they're not light skinned like the Syrians and stuff like that, which intermixing happened, okay, or over the Levant. Very different from like the Arabs of Saudi Arabia and Yemen and stuff like that. Darker, look more like the Ethiopians. But with West Africa, because we're focusing on slavery, is that the Arabs were there before, or Islam was there before, in which, you know, you have that king who had the gold and he created the inflation. Mansa Musa, is it? Right? Okay. And then there's other things in which they did come over here, and they did have all of the export technology and stuff like that. There's stories, I don't know if it's a myth, of them coming to America and saying no. And I read this one amazing book. One of my favorite Islamic history books is written by an Afghani. It's on my Knowledge Hub, in which he teaches us not to look at history from the Western point of view, but look at it from the middle world, or from post-Islam. And you see a completely different history when you look at that, in the sense that people were happy, really, like under the Sharia law of like the Abbasid law, in which every single, you know, part of the world had their own power. They were happy. The Africans were Muslim, but they ruled themselves under Islam. Yeah, there were issues. We have issues to this day. However, when white people, let's be clear, okay, they came and controlled the whole world. And slavery was such an important part of them controlling the rest of the world. It was such a pinnacle part, because now labor as well as resources, it outweighed, which means they got free labor for no reason, in which they used that labor in order to take over the world and cause colonialism on the Muslim world. So when people go around equating slavery that was happening during Makkah and Medina time to the fact of like what white people and the Europeans did, are we okay? There is lack of knowledge when it comes to history if you're equating those two things. Different levels, different mannerisms in which it was happening. And lack of history, and this is a postmodern thing, and this is what I want to talk about and finish this topic on, is the fact that the postmodernists or the secularists that was coming out of France, what they did is, you know what? It would be nice if history was this way. That is the ideology that has infected us because we interact with secular information. And history did not work like that. It did not work in the same manner. The reasons as to why it happened, right? They were in Europe. They didn't have anything. And then they went out and said, ooh, this is nice stuff. I want to own it. Our people, we are the minority. We might, become extinct. So we have to do more savage things in order to stay in power. Okay. That is how it went. While the Muslims were like, we're happy. We have land. We're happy people. Happy people don't destroy the world like this. Okay, that's just what it is. So to equate those two and to use the slavery and to bring it back to the Quran and using it as a reason not to believe in Islam or to be a Muslim, what are we doing? This is the postmodernist agenda, honest to God. And number 3 is going to be your habits, okay? I told you that I had a hard time with the Quran. I could not even, okay? I was on the edge myself. But one day I was walking somewhere. I had literally a traumatic breakdown because somebody I knew did something horrible. And I'm like, how is this possible? Like, how can somebody be a Muslim, do something so horrible? And that's when I started realizing about the inner sciences, about the nafs as well as waswasa, how people are people before they are of a religion. And once I started learning that, life has been so much more different, right? We use group thinking and religion as a way of feeling proud of ourselves. And that's a really dangerous place to be. So in that case, I was walking around and I noticed something. The Quran would always talk about nature, at least in the Meccan surahs. And it would talk about by the moon and by the sun. And of course, my postmodernist mind, and I'm not saying that I wasn't like this, would be why even waste your time on this? Why is it so important by the moon and the sun? Astaghfirullah, but I had to say it because I'm relating to this person. And you know what I realized? I've never been outside. I see technology every single day, and that is the only information that I have. So how could I possibly understand the Quran when my physical world was not anything about that? So I go out in nature, on my habit tracker. Nature interaction is one of the most important things that I have on there. So that is the biggest problem. The way that we see, every time that we're reading or interpreting, we're using our mind and our 5 senses. We're using our preconditioned states of being in order to understand the Quran. And the biggest problem is that the postmodern world that we live in right now is so different from reality. Okay, every single law of existence does not work because of capitalism, which I believe started with slavery. My biggest realization was the fact that I don't even hear the wind. I don't even interact. It doesn't even touch my skin because we live in a house and it is covered with, windows that are noise ceiling. So you can't even hear or touch or engage with it because of technology, which has allowed us to have all of these things, be it our screens, our phones, our TV. We consume information rather than producing. We are interdependent. We live in a global economy, not a self-sufficient economy, and that is because of capitalism yet again, right? It depends on other people, cash crops and stuff like that you learn in history and sustainability. That is my background. So that is where it's coming from. Our mind is tainted. And when I took my Islamic thought classes, that was the time in which everything kind of just cleared up. It just melted away. All of this defensiveness that I had melted away. In the first days of my Islamic thought classes, I would sit there and I would be on fire. We were ready to fight. But then when all of this knowledge started coming, or they started teaching us and the scholars are teaching us, and then you just see it, I felt it, sensed it, all of it melting away. Because what happens is the postmodern era that we live in is very egotistical, ego-centered, right? Everything is a threat to me, and there's a reason for this. The nervous system as well, in which literally the world is a threat. So we have to protect ourselves. So in this case, the ego is it's flaring, right? You are breaking up my concept of what religion is. So when the teachers would say all this stuff, so the scholars would say all this stuff, I'd be wary and scared. But after that, reality hits, and then your ego kind of melts down and you live in reality. And a majority of us don't live in reality because we're not educated, nor are we in the environment to have that reality experience. So that was kind of what happened that day. And I realized from that day on, from that moment on, whenever we're interpreting religion, we have to see what our mind is doing that is causing us to misunderstand, because our mind is what we use in order to interpret the content. Anything that we see, our perception is what sees that. It's not reality. We most of the time don't live in reality. We live in our own perception. So once I started doing that, whenever I see content online or whatever, I always step back. back. And of course, engaging with the Quran on a regular basis, or having commentaries, or having like resources. That's why I have my knowledge hub. That is what is helping me see clearly. But we live in a tainted world, and our perspective is so important. So watch yourself. Do not trust yourself, okay? The gorilla experiment in psychology, if you've ever seen it, that's the one that talks about how people literally cannot see what's in front of them because they are told or taught to focus on one thing. They don't see the gorilla, if you've ever seen the experiment, because they were asked to look for a hat or a certain color, but it was there the whole time. So our mind manipulates us. That is why there are magicians, okay? That is why they can take your watch and you can't even sense it. But this illusion that, this arrogance of I know everything and I can know everything, so something cannot go past me. I think if anything that I learned in my Islamic thought classes, that was the first thing that I took away from it. Always question your mind and your perspectives and your perceptions and keep on looking at it. But to assume that the self understands or the mind understands or that you are smarter than everything else, that's just a recipe for disaster. For this girl's case in which she asked me this question, I hope this, tips helps. But more importantly, this is Allah is the one who leads. Do not put too much pressure on this religion. Like if you do, you're gonna have a hard time, right? Like whenever I released surrender, which is the root words of Islam, salama, peace comes from surrender, right? Just like let it go. There's nothing to hold on to. And that's the difference. That's the biggest thing, especially if you grew up in a religious environment, that, I have to hold on to this deen. Everything else is a threat. Nah, just let it go, man. Just chill. Okay. Not too much though. It's the balance. You have to go back and forth. But the amount of pressure that we put on a religion is so much that it can't keep up, because our brain cannot keep up with the amount of pressure that the world has created, and the amount of pressure that we have today is so much. So inshallah, this was really helpful. And the biggest thing is always to learn. Low iman, disbelief, all of that stuff is a sign of the belief system that you have. And you have taken it in. We are sponges. You have taken it in from the environment and you're trying to understand it. And you need more information, counter information to understand it. But this is a blessing, right? Every time I had people commenting in my comment section saying all these negative things, it wasn't about them and what they said. It wasn't the negative thing that they said. It was telling me that I had a belief system that wasn't stable, that my faith was not stable, and it was time for me to learn more. That is all that it is. Don't take it for negative. What do you need to learn? What is missing in your belief system that is causing you to have these doubts? And you look into that, and that is how you become stronger in your faith, and that is how you prepare for the next level of your life. So inshallah, this was helpful. Until next time, peace.